ॐ भूर्भुवः स्वः तत्सवितुर्वरेण्यं भर्गो देवस्य धीमहि धियो यो नः प्रचोदयात् ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. Namaskar my dear friends, this is second video on the teachings of Ramana Maharshi in his own words. I start with death and rebirth. In nothing did Bhagwan show more clearly that theory has to be adapted to the understanding of the seeker than in the question of death and rebirth. For those who are capable of grasping pure non-dual theory, he explained merely that the question does not arise, for if the ego has no real existence, now it has none after death either. Devotee, do a person's actions in this life affect him in future births? Bhagwan, are you born now? Why do you think of future births? The truth is that there is neither birth nor death. Let him who is born think of death and palliatives for it. Devotee, is the Hindu doctrine of reincarnation right birth? Bhagwan, no definite answer is possible. Even the present incarnation is denied. For instance, in the Bhagavad Gita, devotee, is not our personality beginningless? Bhagwan, find out first whether it exists at all, and after you have solved that problem, ask the question. Namalwar says, in ignorance I took the ego to be the self, but with right knowledge the ego is not, and only you remain as the self. Both the non-dualists and dualists agree on the necessity for self-realization. Attain that first and then raise other questions. Non-dualism or dualism cannot be decided on theoretical grounds alone. If the self is realized, the question will not arise. Whatever is born must die. Whatever is acquired must be lost. But were you born, you are eternally existent. The self can never be lost. Bhagwan indeed discouraged preoccupation with such questions since they merely distract one from the real task of realizing the self here and now. Devotee, they say that we have the choice of enjoying merit or demerit after our death, that it depends on our choice which comes. Is that so? Bhagwan, why raise questions of what happens after death? Why ask whether you were born, whether you are reaping the fruits of your past karma and so on? You will not raise such questions in a little while when you fall asleep. Why? Are you a different person now from the one you were when asleep? No, you are not. Find out why such questions do not occur to you when you are asleep. On occasion, however, Bhagwan did admit of a lower contingent point of view for those who could not hold to the doctrine of pure non-dualism. In the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna first says to Arjuna in chapter 2 that no one was born, and then in chapter 4 there have been numerous incarnations, both of you and me. I know them, but you do not. Which of these two statements is true? The teaching varies according to the understanding of the listener. When Arjuna said that he would not fight against his relatives and elders in order to kill them and gain the kingdom, Sri Krishna said, not that these you or I were not before, are not now, nor will be hereafter. None was born, none has died, nor will it be so hereafter. He further developed this theme, saying that he had given instructions to the sun and threw him to Iskvaku, and Arjuna queried how that could be since he had been born only a few years back while they lived ages ago. Then Sri Krishna saw his point of view and said, yes, there have been many incarnations of me and you. I know them all, but you do not. Such statements appear contradictory, but they are true according to the viewpoint of the questioner. Christ also said, before Abraham was, I am. Just as in dreams you wake up after several new experiences, so after death another body is found. Just as rivers lose their individuality when they discharge their waters into the ocean, and yet the waters evaporate and return as rain on the hills, and back again through the rivers to the ocean. So also individuals lose their individuality when they go to sleep but return again according to their previous innate tendencies. Similarly, in death also, being is not lost. Devotee, how can that be? Bhagwan, see how a tree grows again when its branches are cut off. So long as the life source is not destroyed, it will grow. Similarly, latent potentialities withdraw into the heart at death but do not perish. That is how beings are reborn. Nevertheless, from the higher viewpoint, he would say, in truth, there is neither seed nor tree, there is only being. He would occasionally explain in more detail, but still with the reservation that in reality there is only the changeless self. Devotee, how long is the interval between death and rebirth? Bhagwan, it may be long or short, but a realized man undergoes no such change. He merges into the infinite being as is said in the Brihad Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Some say that those who after death take the path of light are not reborn, whereas those who take the path of darkness are born after they have reaped their karma, self-made destiny in their subtle bodies. If a man's merits and demerits are equal, he is reborn immediately on earth. If the merits outweigh the demerits, his subtle body goes first to heaven, while if the demerits outweigh the merits, it goes first to hell. But in either case, he is later reborn on earth. All this is described in the scriptures, but in fact, there is neither birth nor death. One simply remains what one really is. That only is the truth. Again, he would explain in terms of God's mercy. Again, he would explain in terms of God's mercy. Bhagwan, God in his mercy withholds this knowledge from people. If they knew that they had been virtuous, they would grow proud, and in the other case, they would be despondent. Both are bad. It is enough to know the self. He did, however, refer sometimes to a person's preparedness or maturity as being due to the achievements of a previous incarnation. A competent person who has already, perhaps in a previous incarnation, qualified himself, realizes the truth and abides in peace as he hears it told to him just once. Whereas one who is not so qualified has to pass through the various stages before attaining samadhi, direct pure consciousness of being. That is to say that a lifetime may be regarded as a day's journey upon the pilgrimage to self-realization. How far from the goal one starts depending on the efforts or lack of effort made on the previous day. How far forward one advances depends on the effort of today. A science lecturer from a university asked whether the intellect survives a man's death and was told, "Why think of death? Consider what happens in your sleep. What is your experience of that?" Devotee, but sleep is transient, whereas death is not. Bhagwan, sleep is intermediate between two waking states, and in the same way, death is intermediate between two births. Both are transient. Devotee, I mean, when the spirit is disembodied, does it carry the intellect with it? Bhagwan, the spirit is not disembodied. The bodies differ. If not a gross body, it will be subtle one. As in sleep, dream or daydream. Bhagwan would never admit that differences in mode of expression or formulation of a doctrine between the various religions signified real contradiction, since the truth to which they point is one and immutable. Devotee, is the Buddhist view that there is no continuous entity answering to the idea of the individual soul, right or not? Is this consistent with the Hindu doctrine of a reincarnating ego? Is the soul a continuous entity which reincarnates again and again, according to the Hindu doctrine, or is it a mere conglomeration of mental tendencies? Bhagwan. The real self is continuous and unaffected. The reincarnating ego belongs to a lower plane, that of thought. It is transcended by self-realization. Reincarnations are due to a spurious offshoot of being and are therefore denied by the Buddhist. The human state is due to a mingling of the sentient with the insentient. Sometimes it was not a question of reincarnation but grieving over the death of a loved one. A lady who had come from North India asked Bhagwan whether it was possible to know the posthumous state of an individual. Bhagwan, it is possible, but why try? Such facts are only as real as the person who seeks them. Lady, the birth of a person and his life and death are real to us. Bhagwan, because you wrongly identify yourself with the body, you think of the other also as a body. Neither you nor he is the body. Lady, but from my own level of understanding, I regard myself and my son as a real. Bhagwan, the birth of the I thought is a person's birth and its death is his death. After the I thought has arisen, the wrong identification with the body arises. Identifying yourself with the body makes you falsely identify others also with their bodies. Just as your body was born and grows and will die, so you think the other also was born, grew and died. Did you think of your son before he was born? The thought came after his birth and continues even after his death. He is your son only insofar as you think of him. Where has he gone? To the source from which he sprang. So long as you continue to exist, he does too. But if you cease to identify yourself with the body and realize the true self, this confusion will vanish. You are eternal and others also will be found to be eternal. Until this is realized, there will always be grief due to false values which are caused by wrong knowledge and wrong identification. On the death of King George V, two devotees were discussing the matter in the hall and seemed upset. Bhagwan said, "What is it to you who dies or is lost? Die yourself and be lost, becoming one with the self of all on the ego's extinction." And finally, about the importance of death, religions stress the importance of the frame of mind in which person dies and his last thoughts at death. But Bhagwan reminded people that it is necessary to be well prepared beforehand. If not, undesirable tendencies will rise up at death too powerful to be controlled. Devotee, even if I cannot realize in my lifetime, let me at least not forget on my deathbed. Let me have a glimpse of reality at least at the moment of death, so that it may stand me in good stead in the future. Bhagwan, it is said in the Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8, that whatever is a person's last thought at death determines his next birth, but it is necessary to experience reality now in this life in order to experience it at death. Consider whether this present moment is any different from the last one at death and try to be in the desired state. Heart and head. This seems a suitable place to set forth the Maharishi's teaching about heart and head. He taught that the heart, not the head, is the true seat of consciousness, but by this he did not mean the physical organ at the left side of the chest, but the heart at the right, and by consciousness he did not mean thought but pure awareness or sense of being. He had found this from his own experience to be the center of spiritual awareness and then found his experience confirmed in some ancient text. When his devotees were instructed to concentrate on the heart, it was this spiritual heart on the right that was referred to, and they also found it the center of an actual, almost physical vibration of awareness. However, he would also speak of the heart as equivalent to the self and remind them that in truth it is not in the body at all but is spaceless. Devotee. Why do you say that the heart is on the right when biologists have found it to be on the left? What authority have you? Bhagwan, no one denies that the physical organ is on the left, but the heart of which I speak is on the right. That is my experience, and I require no authority for it. Still, you can find confirmation of it in a Malayali book on Ayurveda and in the Sita Upanishad. Saying this, Bhagwan showed the quotation from the latter and quoted the text from the former. Sometimes one asked, he referred also to the biblical text from Ecclesiastes. The wise man's heart is at the right hand, a fool's heart is at the left. Devotee, why do we have a place such as the heart to concentrate on for meditation? Bhagwan, because you seek true consciousness, where can you find it? Can you attain it outside yourself? You have to find it internally. Therefore, you are directed inward. The heart is the seat of consciousness or consciousness itself. I ask you to observe where the I arises in your body, but it is not really quite correct to say that the I arises from and merges in the chest at the right side. The heart is another name for reality, and this is neither inside nor outside the body. There can be no in or out for it, since it alone is. I do not mean by heart any physiological organ or any plexus or nerves or anything like that. But so long as a man identifies himself with the body or thinks he is in the body, he is advised to see where in the body the I thought arises and merges again. It must be the heart at the right side of the chest, since every man of whatever race and religion and in whatever language he may be speaking points to the right side of the chest to indicate himself when he says I. This is so all over the world, so that must be the place. And by keenly watching the emergence of the I thought on waking and its subsidence on going to sleep, one can see that it is in the heart on the right side. When a room is dark, you need a lamp to light it, but when the sun rises, there is no need for a lamp. Objects are seen without one, and to see the sun itself, no lamp is needed because it is self luminous. Similarly, with the mind, the reflected light of the mind is necessary to perceive objects, but to see the heart, it is enough for the mind to be turned towards it. Then the mind loses itself and the heart shines forth. It is a tantric practice to concentrate on one of the chakras or spiritual centers of the body, very often on the point between the eyebrows. As will be shown in a later chapter, the heart on the right side is not one of these chakras. Nevertheless, in the following passage, Bhagwan explains concisely his teaching that concentration on the heart center is more effective than on any other point, but less effective than pure inquiry. Devotee, there are said to be six subtle organs of different colors in the chest, of which the spiritual heart is said to be the one situated 2 fingers breadth to the right from the center. But the heart is also said to be formless. Does that mean that we should imagine it to have a form and meditate on this, Bhagwan? No. Only the quest who am I is necessary, that which continues to exist throughout sleep and waking is the same being in both. But while waking there is unhappiness and therefore the effort to remove it. When asked who awakes from sleep, you say I hold fast to this I. If that is done, the eternal being reveals itself. The most important thing is the investigation of the I and not concentration on the heart center. There is no such thing as the inner and the outer. Both words mean the same or nothing at all. Nevertheless, there is also the practice of concentration on the heart center, which is a form of a spiritual exercise. Only he who concentrates on the heart can remain aware when the mind ceases to be active and remains still with no thoughts, whereas those who concentrate on any other center cannot retain awareness without thought but only infer that the mind was still after it has become active again. In the following passage on an English lady remarks on this awareness without thought and Bhagwan approves. Devotee, thoughts suddenly cease and I rises up equally suddenly and continues. It is only a feeling, not a thought. Can it be right, Bhagwan? Yes, it is quite right. Thoughts have to cease and reason to disappear for the I to rise up and be felt. Feeling is the main thing, not reason. Devotee, moreover, it is not in the head but at the right side of the chest, Bhagwan. That is where it should be because the heart is there. Devotee, when I look outwards, it disappears. What should I do? Bhagwan, hold fast to it. This does not mean that thought is impossible during the state of I consciousness, as indeed one can see from the example of Bhagwan himself who was permanently in that state. For the ignorant person, thought is like a dense cloud overhead shutting him off from the illumination of the sun. When the ceiling of cloud has been broken and rolled back, letting in the light, he can use thought without being imprisoned by it. To change the metaphor, Bhagwan sometimes compared the mind of the realized man to the moon in the sky in daytime. It is there, but its light is not needed because one can see without it by the direct light of the sun. Suffering. One of the problems about which Bhagwan was often asked was suffering. The questions were usually personal rather than academic, since it was often the experience of grief which drew people to seek solace from him. The real solace came as a silent influence, but he did also answer theoretical questions. The usual answer was to bid the questioner find out who it is that suffers, just as he would bid the doubter find out who it is that doubts. For the self is beyond suffering as it is beyond doubt. Sometimes, however, on a more contingent level, he would point out that whatever makes a person dissatisfied with his state of ignorance and turns him to the quest of the self is beneficial, and that it is often suffering which is the means of doing this. Bhagwan, the bliss of self is always yours and you will find it if you seek it earnestly. The cause of your misery is not in your outer life, it is in you as your ego. You impose limitations on yourself and then make a vain struggle to transcend them. All unhappiness is due to the ego. With it comes all your trouble. What does it avail you to attribute the cause of misery to the happenings of life when that cause is really within you? What happiness can you get from things extraneous to yourself? When you get it, how long will it last? If you would deny the ego and scorch it by ignoring it, you would be free. If you accepted it, will impose limitations on you and throw you into a vain struggle to transcend them. That was how the thief sought to ruin King Janaka. To be the self that you really are is the only means to realize the bliss that is ever yours. A very devoted and simple devotee had lost his only son, a child of 3. The next day he arrived at the ashram with his family. Referring to them, Bhagwan said, training of mind helps one to bear sorrows and bereavements with courage. But the loss of one's children is said to be the worst of all griefs. Grief only exists as long as one considers oneself to have a definite form. If the form is transcended, one knows the oneself to be eternal. There is neither death nor birth. What is born is only the body, and this is the creation of the ego. But the ego is not ordinarily perceived without the body, and so is identified with it. It is thought that matters. Let the sensible man consider whether he knew his body while in deep sleep. Why then does he feel it in the waking state? Although the body was not felt in sleep, did not the self exist? What was his state when in deep sleep, and what is it now when awake? What is the difference? The ego rises up and that is waking. Simultaneously thoughts arise. Find out who has the thoughts, where do they come from. They must arise from the conscious self. Apprehending this even vaguely helps towards the extinction of the ego. The realization of the one infinite existence becomes possible. In that state, there are no individuals but only eternal being. Hence, there is no thought of death or grieving. If a man thinks that he is born, he cannot escape the fear of death. Let him find out whether he was ever born or whether the self takes birth. He will discover that the self always exists and that the body which is born resolves itself into thought, and that the emergence of thought is the root of all mischief. Find where thought comes from, and then you will abide in the ever present inmost self and be free from the idea of birth and fear of death. Devotee, if someone we love dies, it causes grief. Should we avoid such grief by either loving all alike or not loving at all? Bhagwan, if someone we love dies, it causes grief to the one who continues living. The way to get rid of grief is not to continue living. Kill the griever and who will then remain to grieve. The ego must die, that is the only way. The two alternatives you suggest amount to the same. When all are realized to be the one self who is there to love or hate. Sometimes, however, the questions were impersonal, referring not to some private tragedy but to the evil and suffering in the world. In such cases, they were usually by visitors who did not understand the doctrine of non duality or follow the path of self inquiry. Visitor widespread distress such as famine and pestilence spreads havoc through the world. What is the cause of this state of affairs? Bhagwan, to whom does all this appear? Visitor, that won't do. I see misery all around. Bhagwan, you were not conscious of the world and its sufferings while asleep, but you are now that you are awake. Continue in the state in which you are not affected by such things. When you are not aware of the world, that is to say, when you remain as the self in the state of sleep, its sufferings do not affect you. Therefore, turn inwards and seek the self, and there will be an end both of the world and of its miseries. Visitor, but that is selfishness. Bhagwan, the world is not external to you because you wrongly identify yourself with the body. You see the world outside you and its suffering becomes apparent to you. But the world and its sufferings are not real. Seek the reality and get rid of this unreal feeling. This the visitor was unwilling to do, but instead referred again to suffering and to those who strive vainly to remove it. Visitor, there are great men and public workers who cannot solve the problems of suffering in the world. Bhagwan, that is because they are based on the ego. If they remained in the self, it would be different. Still, presuming the absolute reality of the objective world, the visitor now asked in an indirect way how it would be different, demanding that those who abide in the self should accept the unreal as real. Visit why don't Mahatmas help? For the moment, Bhagwan answers on the visitor's own level. Bhagwan, how do you know that they don't? Public speech is outer activity and material help are all outweighed by the silence of the Mahatmas. They accomplish more than others. Now the visitor comes to the practical point, outer activity instead of inner quest, and Bhagwan rejects that viewpoint no less categorically. Visitor, what can we do to ameliorate the condition of the world? Bhagwan, if you remain free from pain, there will be no pain anywhere. The trouble now is due to your seeing the world outside yourself and thinking there is pain in it. But both the world and the pain are within you. If you turn inwards, there will be no pain. Visitor, God is perfect. Why did he create the world imperfect? A work partakes of the nature of its author, but in this case it is not so. Bhagwan, are you something separate from the God that you should ask this question? So long as you consider yourself the body, you see the world as external to you. It is it is to you that the imperfection appears. God is perfection and his work is also perfection. But you see it as imperfect because of your wrong identification with the body or the ego. Visitor, why did the self manifest as this miserable world? Bhagwan, in order that you might seek it. Your eyes cannot see themselves, but if you hold a mirror in front of them, they see themselves. Creation is the mirror. See yourself first and then see the whole world as the self. Visitor, then what it amounts to is that I should always turn inwards. Bhagwan, yes. Visitors, should not I see the world at all? Bhagwan, you are not told to shut your eyes to the world but only to see yourself first and then see the whole world as the self. If you consider yourself as the body, the world appears to be external. If you are the self, the world appears as Brahma manifested. The trouble is that it is extremely difficult to regard the body or the objective world as unreal. Bhagwan admitted that in the following dialogue. Devotee, I have a toothache. Is that only a thought? Bhagwan, yes. Devotee, then why can't I think that there is no toothache and so cure myself? Bhagwan, one does not feel the toothache when one is absorbed in other thoughts or when asleep. Devotee, but still it remains. Bhagwan, so strong is man's conviction of the reality of the world that it is not easily shaken off, but the world is no more real than the individual who sees it. Then a humorous exchange which illustrates the difficulty of the concept. Devotee, at present there is a Sino-Japanese war going on. If it is only in the imagination, can or will Sri Bhagwan imagine it not to be going on and so put an end to it? Bhagwan, laughing, the Bhagwan of the questioner, whom the questioner sees as an external being, is as much a thought of his as the Sino-Japanese war. Finally, a quotation which shows how Bhagwan sometimes answered on a more contingent plan, pointing out that it is suffering that makes a man discontented with the life of the ego and spurs him on to seek self-realization. Devotee, but why should there be suffering now? Bhagwan, if there were no suffering, how could the desire to be happy arise? If that desire did not arise, how could the quest of the self arise? Devotee, then is all suffering good? Bhagwan, yes, what is happiness? Is it a healthy and handsome body, regular meals and so on? Even an emperor has endless troubles although he may be in good health. So all suffering is due to false notion I am the body. Getting rid of this is knowledge. Sin. Sin and evil of every kind are the result of egoism unrestrained by consideration for the injury caused to others or the dele- deleterious effect on the sinner's own character. Religions guard against them by moral and disciplinary codes and emotional appeals, seeking to keep the ego within bounds and prevent its trespassing into forbidden places. However, a spiritual path that is so radical and direct as to deny the ego itself does not need to attend specifically to the various excesses of egoism. All egoism has to be renounced, therefore, non duality turns the attack of the ego itself, not on its specific manifestations. However sinful a person may be, if he would stop wailing inconsolably, alas, I am a sinner, how shall I attain liberation? And casting away even the thought that he is a sinner. If he would jealously carry on meditation on the self, he would most assuredly get informed. However sinful a person may be, if he would stop wailing inconsolably, "Alas, I am a sinner, how shall I attain liberation?" and casting away even the thought that he is a sinner. Similarly, a discipline which aims at transcending thought completely in a realization of the super-rational self does not need to inveigh specifically against evil thoughts. All thoughts are distractions. An European lady asked whether good thoughts were not helpful in seeking realization. At any rate, in the early stages, like the lower rungs of the ladder, and was told, yes, insofar as they keep off bad thoughts, but they themselves must disappear before the state of realization. Because the quality of purity, sattva, is the real nature of the mind. Clearness, like that of the unclouded sky, is the characteristic of the mind expanse. Being stirred by the quality of activity, rajas, the mind becomes restless and influenced by darkness, tamas, manifest as the physical world. The mind thus becoming restless on the one hand and appearing as solid matter on the other, the real is not discerned. Just as fine silk threads cannot be woven with the use of a heavy iron shuttle, or the delicate shades of a work of art be distinguished in the light of a lamp flickering in the wind, so is the realization of truth impossible with the mind rendered gross by darkness, tamas, and restless by activity, rajas. Because truth is exceedingly subtle and serene, mind will be cleared of its impurities only by a desireless performance of duties during several births, getting a worthy master, learning from him, and incessantly practicing meditation on the Supreme. The transformation of the mind into the world of inert matter due to the quality of darkness, tamas, and its restlessness due to the quality of activity, rajas, will cease. Then the mind regains its subtlety and composure. The bliss of the self can manifest only in a mind rendered subtle and steady by assiduous meditation. He who experiences that bliss is liberated even while still alive. He did, of course, insist on the need for purity. Sometimes a visitor would complain that he was too weak to resist his lower tendencies and would simply be told to try harder. According to his temperament, he might be told to find who it is that has the lower tendencies or to trust in God. Devotee, I am a sinner and do not perform any religious duties. Shall I await painful rebirth because of that? Bhagwan, why do you say you are a sinner? Faith in God is enough to save you from rebirth. Cast all your burden on Him. In the Trivachakam it is said, though I am worse than a dog, you have graciously undertaken to protect me. The delusion of death and birth is maintained by you. Is it for me to sit and judge? Am I the Lord here? Almighty God, it is for you to roll me through many bodies or keep me fixed at your feet. Therefore, have faith, and that will save you. Devotee, there is more pleasure in meditation than in sensual enjoyment, and yet the mind seeks the latter and not the former. Why is that? Bhagwan, pleasure and pain are only aspects of the mind. Our essential nature is happiness, but we have forgotten the self and imagine that the body or the mind is the self. It is this wrong identification that gives rise to misery. What is to be done? This tendency is very deep rooted and has continued for many past births and so has grown strong. It will have to go before the essential nature, which is happiness, can be realized. And above all, not to create new vasanas or latent tendencies. Devotee, Swami, how can the grip of the ego be loosened? Bhagwan, by not adding new vasanas, bad habits to it. If the objective reality of the world be an illusion, then the evil in it is also an illusion, and the remedy is to turn inwards to the reality of the self. An American visitor, the secretary of Swami Yogananda, asked why there are good and evil in the world and was told they are relative terms. There must be a subject to know the good and evil. That subject is the ego. It ends in the self, or you can say that the source of the ego is God. This definition is probably more definite and understandable for you. God. Superficially, it might seem that the Maharishi's statements about God were inconsistent, since he would sometimes enjoin complete faith and submission to God and sometimes speak of God as unreal, but actually there was no inconsistency. It must always be remembered that the purpose of his exposition was not to propound a philosophy but to give practical guidance on the spiritual path. Someone who could conceive of the non dual self could understand that it was his own self and the self of God and of the world also, whereas one who clung to the apparent reality of his ego could understand the self only as the God who had created him. According to their needs, he explained in this, as in other matters, he pointed out the uselessness of discussion. Following either path was useful. Theorizing about them was not. All religions postulate the three fundamentals: the world, the soul, and the God. But it is the one reality that manifests itself as these three. One can say the three are really three only, so long as the ego lasts. Therefore, to inhere in one's own being when the ego is dead is the perfect state. The world is real. No, it is mere illusory appearance. The world is conscious. No. The world is happiness. No. What use it is to argue thus? That state is agreeable to all wherein, having given up the objective outlook, one knows one's self and loses all notions either of unity or a duality of oneself and the ego. If one has formed oneself, the world and God will also appear to have form. But if one is formless, who is to see these forms, and how? Without the eye can any object be seen? The seeing self is the eye, and that eye is the eye of infinity. Brahma is not to be seen or known. It is beyond the threefold relationship of seer, sight and seen, or knower, knowledge and known. The reality remains ever as it is. The existence of ignorance or the world is due to our illusion. Neither knowledge nor ignorance is real. What lies beyond them, as beyond all other pairs of opposites, is the reality. It is neither light nor darkness, but beyond both. Though we sometimes speak of it as high and ignorance as its shadow. When there was genuine search for understanding, Bhagwan would explain in some details, always leading the seeker back to the doctrine of the oneself. Mr. Thompson, a very quiet young gentleman who has been staying in India for some years and studying Hindu philosophy as an earnest student, asked, Srimad Bhagavad Gita says, I am the prop for Brahma. In another place it says, I am in the heart of each one. Thus, the different aspects of the ultimate principle are revealed. I take it that there are three aspects, namely, number one, the transcendental, number two, the immanent, and three, the cosmic. Is realization to be in any of these or in all of them? Coming to the transcendental from the cosmic, Vedanta discards the names and forms as being Maya. Again, Vedanta also says that the whole is Brahma, as illustrated by gold and ornaments of gold. How are we to understand the truth? Bhagwan, the Gita says, Brahma hi pratisthaham. If that Aham is known, the whole is known. Devotee, that is the immanent aspect only. Bhagwan, you now think that you are an individual. Outside you there is the universe, and beyond the universe is God. So there is the idea of separateness. The idea must go, for God is not separate from you or the cosmos. The Gita also says, I am the Self, O Gudakesa, seated in the heart of all beings. Thus, God is not only in the heart of all, He is the prop of all, He is the source of all, their abiding place and their and all proceed from Him, have their stay in Him, and finally resolve into Him. Therefore, He is not separate. Devotee, how are we to understand the line in the Gita? This whole cosmos forms a particle of me. Bhagwan. It does not mean that a small particle of God separates from Him and forms the universe. His Shakti is acting, and as a result of one phase of such activity, the cosmos has become manifest. Similarly, the statement in Purusha Sukta, Padosha Viswa Bhutani, all beings form one of his parts, does not mean that Brahma is in four parts. Devotee, I understand that Brahma is certainly not divisible. Bhagwan, so the fact is that Brahma is all and remains indivisible. He is ever realized. However, man does not know this, and it is just what he has to know. Knowledge means overcoming the obstacles which obstruct the revelation of the eternal truth, that the self is the same as a Brahma. The obstacles taken altogether form your idea of separateness as an individual. Therefore, the present attempt will result in the truth being revealed that the self is not separate from Brahma. Christians, except for the greatest mystics, cling to the idea of a permanently real and separate ego. Sri Bhagwan had a discussion on this point with a Jesuit father, but it remained inconclusive. Bhagwan trying to turn the father's mind inward to self-inquiry, and the father demanding a theoretical exposition instead. Dr. Emil Gaithier, as the professor of philosophy at the Sacred Heart College, Senbaganur, Kodaikanal asked, "Can you kindly give me a summary of your teachings?" Bhagwan, they are found in the booklets, particularly in Who Am I? Devotee, I shall read them, but may I have the central point of your teachings from your own lips? Bhagwan, the central point is just the thing. Devotee, it is not clear to me what you mean by that. Dev- Bhagwan, that you should find the central. Devotee, I come from God. Is not God distinct from me? Bhagwan, who asks this question? God does not. You do. So find who you are and then you may find out whether God is distinct from you. Devotee, but God is perfect and I am imperfect. How can I ever know Him fully? Bhagwan, God does not say so. It is you who ask the question. After finding out who you are, you may know what God is. Devotee, but you have found yourself. Please let us know if God is distinct from you. Bhagwan, it is a matter of experience. Each one must experience it for himself. Devotee, oh, I see. God is infinite and I am finite. I have a personality which can never merge into God. Is not that so? Bhagwan, infinity and perfection do not admit of parts. If a finite being is apart from infinity, the perfection of infinity is marred. Thus, your statement is a contradiction in itself. Devotee, no, see, there is both God and creation. Bhagwan, how are you aware of your personality? Devotee, I have a soul, I know it by its activities. Bhagwan, did you know it in deep sleep? Devotee, the activities are suspended in deep sleep. Bhagwan, but you exist in sleep and you do now too. Which of these two is your real state? Devotee, sleep and waking are mere accidents. I am the substance behind the accidents. He looked up at the clock and said that it was time for him to catch the train. He left after thanking Sri Bhagwan, so the conversation ended abruptly. The following talk takes up various problems which plague philosophers and theologians: divine omniscience and free will, natural laws and divine activity, personal God and impersonal. And yet the tone of answer shows that Bhagwan considers it of rather secondary importance. Devotee, what is the relation between my free will and the overshadowing might of the omnipotent? A is the omnipotence of a God consistent with the ego's free will. B is the omniscience of God consistent with the ego's free will. C are natural laws consistent with God's free will. Bhagwan. Yes, free will is the present appearing to a limited faculty of sight and will. That same ego sees its past activities as falling into a course of law or rules, its own free will being one of the links in the course of law. The omnipotence and omniscience of God are then seen by the ego to have acted through the appearance of his own free will. So he comes to the conclusion that the ego must go by appearances. Natural laws are manifestations of God's will and they have been laid down. The following dialogue is characteristics as showing refusal to discuss theory and insistence on the need for practice. Devotee, is God personal? Bhagwan, yes, he is always the first person, the I, ever standing before you. Because you give precedence to worldly things, God appears to have receded to the background. If you give up all else and seek Him alone, He will remain as the I, the Self. Devotee, the final state of realization is said according to Advaita, a qualified union, while Dvaita maintains that there is no union at all. Which of these should be considered the correct view? Bhagwan. Why speculate about what will happen at some time in the future? All are agreed that the I exists. To whichever school of thought he may belong, let the earnest seeker first find out what the I is, then it will be time enough to know what the final state will be, whether the I will get merged in the Supreme Being or stand apart from Him. Let us not forestall the conclusion but keep an open mind, devotee. But will not some understanding of the final state be a helpful guide even to the aspirant? Bhagwan. No purpose is served by trying to decide now what the final state of realization will be. It has no intrinsic value. Why, devotee, why not? Bhagwan, because you proceed on a wrong principle, your conclusion is arrived at by the intellect which shines only by the light it derives from the self. Is it not presumptuous on the part of the intellect? Is it not presumptuous on the part of the intellect to sit in judgment over that from which it derives its little light? How can the intellect, which can never reach the self, be competent to ascertain and much less decide the nature of the final state of realization? Is it like trying to measure the sunlight at its source by the standard of the light given by a candle? The wax will melt down before the candle comes anywhere near the sun. Instead of indulging in mere speculation, devote yourself here and now to the search for the truth that is ever within you. Sometimes questions were also asked about the multiple gods of Hinduism. In this connection, it should be explained that Hindus, like Christians or Muslims, worship the one God. Some of the questions about God recorded above were put by Hindus. However, they also worship God manifested in various forms. One possibility or name or form or viewpoint, not negating another. Devotee, why are so many gods mentioned? Bhagwan, the body is only one, but how many functions are performed by it? The source of all these functions is one. It is the same with the gods. It would sometimes be asked whether the various gods and their heavens were real, but such a question starts from the presumption of the reality of this physical world and the questioner's body, a presumption which Bhagwan would not admit. Instead, he would turn this question, like others, to the quest for reality. Devotee, are the gods Ishvara and Vishnu and their heavens Kailas and Vaikuntha real? Bhagwan, as real as you are in this body, devotee, I mean, have they got a phenomenal existence like my body, or are they pure fictions like the horns of a hare? Bhagwan, they do exist, devotee. If so, they must be somewhere. Where are they? Bhagwan, in you, devotee, then they are only my idea, something which I create and control. Bhagwan, everything is devotee, but I can create a pure fiction like the horns of a hare, or a partial truth like a mirage, while there are also facts which exist irrespective of my imagination. Do the gods Ishvara and Vishnu exist like that? Bhagwan says yes. Is God subject to cosmic dissolution at the end of a cycle? Bhagwan, why should he be a man who realizes the self transcends cosmic dissolution and is liberated? Why should not Ishvara, God, who is infinitely wiser and abler than a man, devotee to gods and devils also exist? Bhagwan says yes. Devotee, how are we to conceive of a supreme divine consciousness? Bhagwan, as that which is particularly interesting are the questions asked by a Muslim professor about the hymns which Bhagwan wrote to God in the form of Arunachala. So I end the video here. Thanks a lot for watching this video. Please like, comment and share the video and subscribe this channel. Namaste, my dear friend. Namaskar.